The courtroom was tense, every breath in the chamber heavy with the weight of anticipation. The polished wood, the rows of journalists ready with pens and cameras, the silent murmur of observers, it all created a stage not just for legal arguments, but for history itself. Judge John Roberts sat at the center, his face an immovable mask of authority, his reputation towering over the room. He adjusted his glasses with deliberate precision, signaling that the moment had arrived. Across from him stood Jasmine Crockett, her posture firm, eyes sharp, and presence impossible to ignore. She wasn't here simply as another voice in the political storm. She was here as a defender of democratic principles, a fighter against the quiet creep of intimidation that had silenced so many before her. When Roberts leaned forward, his voice was calm but edged with condescension. "Congresswoman Crockett," he began, "you seem to misunderstand the scope of constitutional authority. Perhaps it is beyond your legal experience to fully grasp the nuances." His tone dripped with the suggestion that she was unqualified, an outsider in the arena of legal giants. The comment, subtle yet sharp, drew a few gasps from the spectators. Crockett did not flinch. She had heard this before, men in power dismissing her, diminishing her, believing that belittlement would weaken her stance. Instead, her jaw tightened, her silence more powerful than any immediate rebuttal. Reporters scribbled furiously, sensing that they had just witnessed the spark that could ignite something larger. Social media lit up within minutes as those watching live began to post clips of the exchange. Some saw Roberts' statement as the confident assertion of a judge defending his turf, while others saw it as a blatant attempt to patronize and undermine a woman whose intellect was underestimated at his peril. The divide in perception was already forming, and the battle lines were being drawn not only in the courtroom, but across the entire nation. Crockett glanced briefly at the gallery, then back to Roberts. Her lips curled into the faintest trace of a smile, the kind of expression that suggested she was not intimidated, but rather sharpening her blade for the verbal duel to come. The silence after Roberts's remark lasted only a heartbeat, but it was long enough to echo like thunder through the courtroom. Cameras zoomed in on Jasmine Crockett, capturing every flicker of her expression, every second of the tension building in her poised stance. Then, with measured calm, she leaned forward and placed her hands firmly on the table before her. Her voice, when it came, was steady but sharp, like the strike of a blade. "With all due respect, Chief Justice, I didn't come here to be lectured about my qualifications. I came here to challenge a system that pretends neutrality while bending under political pressure. You can question my experience, but you will not question my right to stand here and speak the truth." The statement landed like a hammer. Some gasped, others applauded quietly, their murmurs swiftly silenced by the gavel. Roberts' eyes narrowed. For decades, he had maintained control with little effort, commanding deference by the sheer gravity of his office. But here was someone refusing to bow, someone matching his authority with fearless defiance. His response was laced with disdain. "Congresswoman, passion is not a substitute for legal reasoning. Your accusations border on disrespect not only to this court, but to the entire judiciary. Be careful where you tread." If Roberts meant to intimidate, the attempt backfired. Crockett took his warning as an open invitation to push further. She straightened her shoulders, her voice rising just enough to carry to the furthest row of the gallery. "What disrespects this nation, Your Honor, is when those entrusted with power use it to shield corruption rather than expose it. I didn't come here for theatrics. I came here to remind America that no robe, no title, and no polished speech is above accountability." The room erupted, not in noise, but in energy. Every person present felt it. The balance of power was shifting. Roberts adjusted in his chair, suddenly aware that this was no ordinary confrontation. Crockett wasn't just speaking to him. She was speaking through him, to the millions watching, to the citizens who had long believed the highest courts were untouchable. And with each word, she dismantled the very aura of invincibility Roberts had worn for years. Roberts adjusted his glasses and leaned forward, his voice dropping into that cold, authoritative register that once silenced senators and presidents alike. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said, "this court does not exist for your political theater. You speak of corruption, yet you offer nothing but rhetoric. Where is your evidence?" It was a move meant to corner her, to expose her as a loud voice without substance. But Jasmine was ready. She reached into her folder, pulled out a series of highlighted documents, and held them up for all to see. The cameras zoomed instantly, broadcasting the pages across millions of screens. "Evidence?" she repeated, her tone cutting through the air like a blade. "Here it is. Memos, communications, and financial records that trace patterns of favoritism and judicial bias. This isn't theater, Chief Justice. It's the paper trail of a system shielding those who abuse their power." The crowd shifted, murmurs rolling like waves. Even those predisposed to doubt her could see she wasn't bluffing. The pages were real. The ink was undeniable. Roberts stiffened, gripping his gavel as though it could reassert control. But Crockett didn't give him the chance. "You demand evidence as though America hasn't been watching case after case where justice bends to privilege. Well, today we stop pretending. Today the veil comes off." For a moment, Roberts faltered. His jaw tightened, but his reply came slower, the weight of her words sinking in. "You tread dangerously close to contempt," he warned, though the warning sounded less commanding now, more desperate, as if he was holding together the last thread of authority. "And Jasmine?" She leaned back slightly, a faint smile tugging at her lips, not arrogance, but certainty. She wasn't just answering Roberts. She was indicting the very notion that anyone, no matter how high their seat, was immune to accountability. The audience felt it too. Gasps turned into hushed nods, and cameras caught expressions of realization spreading through the room. Roberts, the untouchable figure, was no longer untouchable. Crockett had dragged the conflict out from behind closed doors and into the unforgiving light of public judgment. The gavel cracked against the wood, its sharp echo meant to reassert dominance, but instead it sounded like a desperate attempt to halt a tide already surging past control. Roberts straightened his shoulders, fighting to maintain composure, but the tension in the chamber was palpable. Every camera lens captured the sweat beginning to form along his temple. Every microphone caught the subtle hesitation in his breath. He was a man used to ruling from behind layers of tradition and formality. Yet here, under the relentless light of public scrutiny, he looked cornered. "Congresswoman," Roberts began, his tone forceful but trembling beneath, "you are overstepping your boundaries. The judiciary is not on trial today." But Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. Her voice rang steady, unwavering, laced with the conviction of someone who had waited for this moment. "Not on trial?" she shot back. "Then explain why judges hand down rulings that silence the voices of the people while protecting the powerful. Explain why decisions consistently tilt in favor of those with wealth and connections. The American people are not blind, Chief Justice. They see what's happening, and today they hear it out loud." The gallery stirred, a wave of murmurs sweeping through the chamber. Journalists' fingers raced across keyboards, commentators whispered into microphones, and millions at home leaned closer to their screens. For the first time in memory, the highest authority of the judicial branch was not untouchable. He was being called to account. Roberts gripped his gavel tighter, his knuckles whitening, his measured mask cracking. "This is reckless," he declared, his voice rising. You risk undermining the very foundation of trust in our institutions." Jasmine leaned forward, her eyes locked onto his, her words slicing through the chamber like fire. Trust? Trust is not given. It is earned. And when institutions betray the people, trust collapses. Don't point fingers at me, Chief Justice. I didn't erode faith in this system. The corruption you defend did. Gasps filled the room. The statement wasn't just defiance, it was an indictment aimed directly at the heart of the man who symbolized American justice. For once, John Roberts had no ready retort. The silence that followed was louder than any gavel strike, and the world watching knew. The old balance of power had shifted. The silence after Jasmine Crockett's last words stretched across the chamber like a taut wire, ready to snap. Then, with a calculated calmness, she placed a stack of documents onto the table beside her. The sound of the papers hitting the wood was louder than the gavel that Roberts had slammed moments earlier. Every eye turned toward the pile, legal opinions, transcripts, and whistleblower statements. The chamber shifted from being a theater of rhetoric to something far heavier. The suggestion of proof. "Chief Justice," Jasmine said, her tone cool and deliberate. "These aren't my words alone. These are the voices of clerks, aides, and attorneys who have seen the process from inside. They describe a system bent, twisted to serve interests far from the people it swore to protect. You call me reckless. But what is reckless, if not hiding these truths from America?" Roberts leaned back in his chair, his lips tightening, his eyes darting to the stack of papers as if they might ignite. Cameras zoomed in, screens across the country magnified every twitch of his jaw, every flicker of unease. He opened his mouth to speak, but his first attempt produced only a faint rasp. He cleared his throat and tried again, louder but less convincing. "These allegations are unsubstantiated. This is theater, not testimony." Crockett raised a brow, her expression almost pitying. "If it's theater, then why does it rattle you so much?" she countered. The audience rippled with low laughter, a dangerous sound in a space meant for solemnity. For Roberts, the attack cut deeper than an insult. It was a wound to the foundation he had spent decades building. He straightened his notes, adjusted his robe, but nothing could disguise the tremor now coursing through his voice. The American people weren't just hearing an argument. They were watching power itself falter. Journalists framed the scene instantly. A congresswoman outmaneuvering the Chief Justice. Social media lit up, hashtags erupting, commentators calling it a turning point. And yet the most unsettling detail was Roberts's silence when pressed again. He avoided Crockett's stare, and in doing so, confirmed what millions feared. She had struck a nerve that could not be ignored. The atmosphere in the chamber had shifted from tension to electricity, every word vibrating through the audience like the echo of a drumbeat. Roberts adjusted his robe again, as if tightening the fabric could rebuild the wall that Jasmine Crockett had just torn down. But the wall was gone, and every attempt to restore it looked like desperation. Jasmine, however, was far from finished. She leaned forward, her voice calm but infused with razor-sharp precision. "Chief Justice, when Americans look at this court, they expect fairness. They expect impartiality. They expect protection. But what they see instead is hesitation, deflection, and fear. They don't need another lecture on decorum. They need honesty. And right now, you're not giving it to them." The words hung heavy in the air. Even those who had entered the room ready to dismiss her now leaned forward, captivated. Roberts's expression hardened, but the cameras betrayed the flicker of unease that no amount of composure could hide. He attempted a smile, small, rehearsed, and utterly hollow. It looked more like a grimace under the spotlight of public scrutiny. Then, almost like a final act of control, Roberts raised his hand. "This line of questioning is out of order," he declared. His gavel struck again, but this time the sound was drowned out by murmurs spreading through the room. For once, the symbol of authority failed to command silence. Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she raised her own voice just enough to pierce through the noise. "Out of order? Or inconvenient? Because those are not the same thing, Chief Justice." The chamber erupted. Some gasped, others applauded, and social media instantly flooded with clips of her words, paired with captions like, "Crockett calls out Roberts and the question he couldn't answer." In living rooms across America, people debated furiously. Was she reckless, or was she finally saying aloud what so many had whispered? Networks scrambled to cut the footage into breaking news segments. Analysts framed it as a constitutional crisis unfolding live. And through it all, Roberts sat frozen, realizing his silence was no longer a shield, but an admission. The sixth stage of this confrontation was no longer about two individuals in a chamber. It had become something far larger, a symbol of truth, clashing against power, and truth refusing to be silenced. The silence that followed felt heavier than any gavel strike. The chamber, once a fortress of authority, was now buzzing with an energy that could not be contained. Jasmine Crockett had transformed a standoff into a spectacle of truth, and everyone knew it. Roberts, normally the figure of calm judicial restraint, now looked cornered. His every attempt at control, his gestures, his words, his rulings, had been dismantled by the persistence of one Congresswoman who refused to yield. And for millions watching at home, this wasn't just about a single exchange. It was about whether the most powerful voices in America still had the courage to face accountability. Jasmine straightened her posture, her gaze steady, as she delivered her final words. The American people don't want excuses. They don't want spin. They don't want another lecture on how the system works. They want truth. They deserve it. And if you can't provide it, then maybe it's time to ask yourself why you're sitting in that chair at all. The chamber erupted, not in chaos, but in an outpouring of recognition. Applause broke out despite attempts to stifle it. Cameras captured every second, and within moments her statement became the headline across networks and social media feeds. Hashtags like "Was Crockett exposes" and "Roberts cornered" trended nationwide. What began as a quiet exchange had become a seismic moment, shaking public trust and sparking conversations at dinner tables, in workplaces, and on every platform where Americans gathered. Roberts remained frozen, his silence more damning than any rebuttal could ever be. For Jasmine, this was not just a victory, it was a declaration. A reminder that even in the highest halls of power, voices of accountability could break through the noise and demand justice. And for those watching, one truth was clear. This story was far from over. More confrontations, more revelations, and more battles for truth awaited. If you want to see where this fight goes next, don't just watch from the sidelines. Subscribe now and join the movement. Because in a world where power tries to silence truth, being informed is the greatest weapon of all.